Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show on this Tuesday, March 30th, 2021. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service in Anchorage. And as always, if you would like additional information, you can call 1-800-472-0391, or better yet, go online to weather.gov/Alaska. Well, taking a look at what we have going on here in terms of any hazardous weather, the advisories, watches, and warnings. We'll start in the southeast. We continue to see a winter weather advisory in effect through 10 a.m. Wednesday morning for White Pass there northwest of Juneau. And then for the interior, a number of winter storm warnings, blizzard warnings, and winter weather advisories in effect. First, the areas east central, along and south of the Yukon Valley. Fairbanks area is under a winter weather advisory. And we have winter storm warnings along the Yukon River and to the north there through Bettles on up toward Arctic Village. Generally light snow is anticipated along with cold conditions and just some blowing snow at times, but otherwise the system should begin to weaken and wind down. The more significant winds are along the Arctic coast as blizzard warnings remain in effect up there for at least into the late evening and pre-dawn. And that'll at least begin to improve a bit tomorrow, though still breezy there along the Arctic and northwest coast. Off to the southwest there, you see the orange areas. Those are winter storm watches that will be in effect for Thursday night into Friday, as there will be another system coming in from off the Bering that will have the potential to produce blizzard conditions there in the west coast areas as we get toward the end of the week. So looking at satellite imagery, you can see over the Gulf of Alaska the bright, higher enhanced cloud tops there. And that is associated with an area of low pressure that is developing over the northern Gulf of Alaska, just off the Kenai. That feature is going to spread moisture up into southeast Alaska. Excuse me, and that will be the case through the day tomorrow. Further north, low pressure across north central areas northwest of Fairbanks is going to continue to slowly weaken, and the precipitation around it will just generally become more areas of light snow or flurries or some scattered snow showers in time. So that's why conditions will be improving gradually across the interior as we head through, especially tomorrow afternoon and certainly by Thursday. Breezy conditions, though, will continue along the Arctic coast and portions of the west coast, Kotzebue down toward Nome, where blowing and drifting snow will remain an issue. And then as we look further west, you'll see that frontal system moving through the western Aleutians, and that'll be the next weather maker as it crosses the Aleutians and especially enters the west coast here for the end of the week. So one more quick check, you can see the enhanced cloud tops, plume of moisture coming up out through the North Pacific that is riding up into the northern Gulf and into the southeast peninsula and south central coast. And then areas of the interior will see that low pressure gradually weaken as the next system out there way in the western Aleutians begins to advance eastward, crossing the Bering. So at this time today, we have low pressure there in north central Alaska. They'll be in the process of weakening, but still continuing to produce some brisk winds, blowing and drifting snow here tonight into early tomorrow morning along the Arctic coast and the west coast. Cold front extending south from that feature will be weakening, but it has allowed colder air to sink down into the southwest portions of the state. And then low pressure there off the Kenai will gather a bit of steam here as we head through tonight into tomorrow morning. That will force an occluded front up into the southeast peninsula with rain and snow being confined to the higher elevations of the mountains and the interior coast waterways, whereas the ocean side will tend to see more in the way of rain or some mixed precipitation. The low up across north central Alaska will continue to weaken as we head through the day on Thursday, with some troughiness lagging there and just patchy light snow or some scattered snow showers as the system continues to dissipate. And then low pressure along the north central coast near Prince William Sound will continue to just kind of work its way east, producing rain along the southeast coast, up around Yakutat and down towards Sitka. Out over the Pacific there, kind of some lighter snow or a mix of rain and snow, with that one little weak low scooting across the outer tip of the Alaska Peninsula. And as we go into Thursday, the system over the Gulf of Alaska will continue to gradually weaken and still produce some light precipitation there across the southeast, with some troughiness lagging back through east central and up toward the north slope. There'll be some patchy light snow or snow showers associated with that feature. Weak high pressure briefly drops in to the west side of the state during the day on Thursday, ahead of the next frontal system that'll be emerging from the Bering. And that system does have slightly warmer air, at least sandwich in between it as it lifts on through the Aleutians and north upward into the central Bering Sea. So temperatures, low temperatures for Wednesday morning will be in the mid-30s for much of the southeast area, including the inner waterways. Back toward the south central coast, lows will get a little bit below freezing, upper 20s. Fairbanks, or I should say Anchorage, down to about 26, but colder air as you get west into the interior of southwest Alaska, single digits to near 10 above. And then lows tonight will generally be around or a bit below 10 below zero along the Arctic coast, and in the teens south of the Yukon Valley, with readings on the west coast, Seward Peninsula around 5, 7 below. And extending outward here to the Kenai, you'll see lows upper 20s on the Gulf side and 20s going down the length of the Alaska Peninsula before getting back up a bit above freezing, mid-30s along the length of the Aleutian chain. High temperatures Wednesday afternoon will be in the lower 40s across the southeast, back up a couple few degrees above freezing, north end of Cook Inlet up through Anchorage. And then the Kenai generally in the 30s, 36 there at Kodiak. And then heading up to the north, a little bit below zero along the Arctic coast, flirting with 30 around Fairbanks. Otherwise, generally single digits along the west coast. And highs coming off the Alaska Peninsula will creep back upwards into the 20s and 30s, and then highs around 40 along the Aleutian chain. And low temperatures on Thursday morning will be around or just a tad above freezing in the southeast, down to 17 though at Anchorage. And west of there, we're looking at the interior of the southwest peninsula get below zero. In the north, the Arctic coast around 10 to 15 below, the interior of the Yukon down around or a bit below zero. And heading out the southwest interior will be anywhere from around 0 to 10 below, with areas along the tip of the Alaska Peninsula in the 20s and lows in the mid to upper 30s along the Aleutian chain. Finally, highs on Thursday afternoon will be anywhere from the upper 30s to around 40 degrees down toward Ketchikan, entry there, Dixon entrance. Heading west, readings should still be a bit below freezing, though, around Anchorage and the Kenai. And as we head further north, high temperatures will remain below zero, around 3 to 5 below along the Arctic coast, generally in the teens in the Yukon Valley. And areas of the west and the Seward Peninsula will be anywhere from 0 to maybe 5 above. And then heading out through the southwest areas, Bethel will have highs in the mid-teens. Readings creeping upward along the Alaska Peninsula. Temperatures there should be getting back up to around or just a tad above freezing. And then as we advance westward across the Aleutian chain, as I mentioned earlier, that little push of slightly milder air should help to get high temperatures across the Aleutians back up into the lower 40s on Thursday afternoon. So that does it for our general tour of Alaska and weather. Coming up next, the aviation weather segment.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, it's time now for the aviation weather segment. And the flying weather for Wednesday morning will show extensive IFR conditions across the Alaska interior, especially from the Alaska Range northward across the Yukon Valley up to the north slope there, just north of the Brooks Range, and also across the southeast and then out toward the west from the eastern Aleutians back toward the western Aleutians. And this is in response to, we have a weakening area of low pressure across north central Alaska, and then we have one that's sitting out over the north end of the Gulf. And that will continue to keep IFR conditions going on in the northwest, especially north of the Yukon River, and then also across portions of the southeast, extending into the southeast peninsula, especially along the interior of the inner waterways, and then out west of the Alaska Peninsula across the eastern and central Aleutians as another frontal system works its way eastward with a little warmer air aloft. And then on Thursday morning, we still have IFR conditions across the Alaska Range, central Yukon Valley on up toward the Brooks Range, also areas of the southeast and inner waterways from Skagway down toward Ketchikan, and then also the eastern Aleutians into the central Bering Sea. And Thursday afternoon, conditions should improve to VFR and MVFR across the interior of the state. However, IFR conditions remain along and off the coast there of the Gulf, there in the southeast, and IFR conditions there moving into the western coastal areas, including the outer islands, as well as the central Aleutians. So past conditions on Wednesday for Anaktuvuk will be IFR, and that'll be the case for Atigun as we travel southward. Lake Clark and Merrill will see IFR conditions, especially on the western entrances, and gradually improve to MVFR during the afternoon, though it may be a little more stubborn and slow to improve at Merrill. And then the areas of Rainy on over rotating eastward, we're going to see stuck in IFR conditions on Wednesday at Rainy, as well as Windy Pass and Isabel. And then as we go farther east, Mentasta also stays IFR throughout the day on Wednesday. Tanita will go from IFR to gradually improve to MVFR during the afternoon. And Portage, we are looking for IFR conditions to start Wednesday, but with the conditions gradually improving to MVFR. Finally, in the southeast, Chilkoot and White will remain socked in with IFR conditions throughout Wednesday. And a quick check of the freezing levels. The freezing level will be near the surface there along the inner waterway, with slightly higher freezing levels of 2,000 to 4,000 feet off of Haida, as well as Vancouver. And then as we go west, the freezing level is near the surface across the Kenai and Kodiak Island, then back out over the tip of the Alaska Peninsula into the central Bering. And you can see the influx of warmer air aloft anywhere above 4,000, even 6,000 feet across the eastern and all the way back through the central western Aleutians. Now, the best chance of some icing on Wednesday will be in the southeast along the coastal areas there above 4,000 feet. Also, another area as a frontal system and warmer air aloft arrives, freezing levels, because they are higher, there could be some icing above 6,000 feet in the eastern Aleutians, and then areas north above 2,000 feet across the Yukon Valley on up toward the north slope. Finally, a check of the stronger upper level winds at 30,000 feet. We have one jet core impacting British Columbia in the south end of the southeast peninsula with winds upwards to 125 knots from the southwest. And then as we go across the west side of the state, northwest winds 85 knots moving through western areas from the Bering Strait all the way down to the beginning of the Alaska Peninsula. And then finally, out over the Bering Sea, there is a band of stronger upper level winds upwards to 135 knots, crossing there down toward the eastern portion of the Aleutians. Going down to 9,000 feet, we have a low pressure circulation over the northern Gulf of Alaska with southwest winds upwards to 55 knots coming on shore there toward British Columbia. And then crossing the Alaska Peninsula, we have northwest winds 55 knots in a broader area that'll produce some stronger winds near the surface there. From the eastern Aleutians upwards to 60 knots from the northwest. And then down at 3,000 feet, low pressure circulation is there in the northern Gulf around Prince William Sound. And strongest winds are at and below 3,000 feet will be at the tip of the Alaska Peninsula, especially out over the eastern Aleutians, where winds could be upwards to 50 knots. That'll result in the best chance of some turbulence over the eastern Aleutians below 3,000 feet, with other areas extending over toward the southeast and up there in the Seward Peninsula.
Hello again, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with the National Weather Service for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And joining us again, talking about the Augmented Reality Sandbox, is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska. And he's actually talking about a project from AKwx, which is the experimental program to stimulate competitive research. A lot of acronyms, but some really fun stuff today, right, Eric?
You bet. We've got a learning tool that is a tool that's fun to use, and it really has a relevance to actually daily lives of anyone who goes outside and sees lumpy topography in Alaska. We've got a lot of mountains and such. You know, when I was younger and go on your first hike in the hills, say, you're given, maybe you're in the Boy Scouts or you get at the kiosk at the trailhead, a topographic map, a flat piece of paper with all these lines on it, bullseyes, long lines that curve back on themselves, say, perhaps things that look like this. A quadrangle or a topographic map. We've got here just to illustrate a couple of examples near Denali. Alaska has so much topography, so many mountains. And what are all these lines that we see? It can be tough to know what this means the first time you look at it. What we've got, all these lines represent lines of where the elevation of the topography goes through a certain level above sea level. Say that this line represents where the mountains have gone from below 1,000 feet, mean sea level, up through 1,000 feet and above. That's your 1,000-foot contour. And when the mountain keeps going up, you're up to 1,200 feet, 1,400 feet, and so on. And that's how you get this little bullseye around the peak of a mountain.
Kind of makes layered slices, right?
Kind of like layered slices. Nice way to look at that. And when you see the lines are closer together, you're going up more steeply. If the mountain rises more slowly, it takes you longer in horizontal space to go through those different vertical increments. So
that is really hard to visualize.
Right. Imagine you're looking at a 2D piece of paper, two-dimensional piece of paper, but you're trying to understand what the three-dimensional world looks like. Well, enter the augmented reality sandbox. Yes, what is that? It is right here. We have the sandbox with us today, Sandbox 2.0, portable version.
Sweet.
Built up at University of Alaska Fairbanks. And we've got a couple of folks helping out today.
Let's see, Alana Valaji, and she's a mechanical engineering student from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. If you want to give us a thumbs up there, Alana, thanks for helping us out today. And Courtney Breest, she's the outreach coordinator from AKwx, also helping us out today. Thanks, Courtney. And
this tool here has a Microsoft Kinect to sense the level of sand in this sandbox. And then the Kinect feeds its information into a computer that then sends a signal to a projector to draw the appropriate topographic lines on this topography. The fun thing about this, as we can see here, is that the sandbox and its Kinect and its projector, they all work as a team. So here we've got a mountain in the middle of the sandbox. What if we took down the mountain to some degree? Watch as the software responds and redraws the topography.
Kind of a caldera forming there.
There you go, And what's fun about the sandbox too is it knows that gravity flows downhill, and we've got some water that's actually down in the lowest elevations. And what's happening now is we're making it rain a little bit. We'll fill up rain into that elevated lake bed, that caldera, as you said. And so now water is pooled up there. And what if you gouged out an outlet channel?
Glacial dam release.
There you go. The water flows out. What we're seeing here is a tool that allows people to touch and connect, Microsoft Connect, RRR, to connect two-dimensional topographic maps like what we have here, these flat things on a piece of paper, to the real three-dimensional world. I think this Sandbox's real particular application as a learning tool to young people is, what does a two-dimensional map mean when it's trying to represent the three-dimensional world? This sandbox is kind of both at once. It's actually three-dimensional, lumpy topography there, the sand, but it's got these lines drawn on the three-dimensional sand that would be on a two-dimensional piece of paper.
Wow, that is a huge leap from the learning that we experienced when we were younger to how children and even adults are visualizing in these new forms of technology. Allows that to kind of reshape their thinking and visualize this in a very useful and absolutely hands-on way. It's amazing.
It's a hands-on tool, and
it's hard for me to sit here and not go play with that.
Well, that's what happened at GINA up at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks when the first model was being made, the prototype with plywood and such. We had professional adult professor types had heard about this, and they came by because they wanted to see how it worked.
Okay.
And everyone becomes that idealistic, wonder-filled youngster.
Sure.
And you just can't help but play with that, and to see how it reacts in time, and
Right.
it's a dynamic learning tool, and it
Dynamic.
responds.
That's exactly the word.
And
Yeah.
you wonder what applicabilities beyond a teaching
Right.
tool for
Where does it
topography
go?
can it have? You can see how in Alaska we have inundation mapping is an issue. If you had water slosh inland, say in a coastal flooding event
Right.
on the western coast of Alaska or the Arctic coast, you could see this. The concept is illustrated here as an introductory learning method. I think this is a potentially good outreach tool for all of us in Alaska.
Okay, so not only just a topographical sense, a mapping sense, maybe something that leads into understanding of how geographic information systems work with GIS, but also geology, if we wanted to get into kind of the formations and the bigger land masses and the representation of the 2D map. We could go into hydrology, which is very important in Alaska, of course. And even just understanding the weather sense. Mounding up a big pile of sand could be that Arctic high pressure system sitting on top of Fairbanks, and the voids would be low pressure systems. This can go a lot of different directions.
Yes, exactly. It's not just landforms, but pressure has contours of high pressure and low pressure. And I wish I had had this kind of a learning tool when I was taking
kidding.
Meteorology 101 back 25 years ago.
wow.
Would have been helpful, I think.
Probably would have gotten a better grade, yeah. Okay, thank you so much for coming by, Eric, and Alana and Courtney, thank you so much for your help there in the sandbox. We are going to play in the sandbox a little bit more coming up tomorrow on our next edition of Alaska Weather Facts. We hope you join us for that. In the meantime, make sure you go to alaska.edu/EPSCOR. That's alaska.edu EPSCOR to learn more information about what we're doing with this augmented reality sandbox around Alaska. We'll see you next time on Alaska Weather Facts. And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back to the marine segment. I'm David Kramer here with the ice analysis. We do have some ice extending down from the St. Matthew Island area, south of Nunavik Island, and into the Bristol Bay area, as well as more ice by the Kamishak Bay area and Cook Inlet. Not a lot of major changes are expected to the ice as we look forward in time. Taking a look now in southeast Alaska for Wednesday, in the inside waters we have southerly winds 25 to 35 knots, getting stronger as we get farther to the south, and seas up to as high as 13 feet in the southern areas. Out over the Gulf waters, primarily southwesterly flow, 35 knots in the more southern locations, and then down to 20 knots as we get farther to the north. As we move into Thursday in the inside waters, southerly winds expected 15 to 20 knots, stronger farthest to the south. Out over the eastern portions of the Gulf, southwest winds 20 knots. And then as we get farther to the north, transitioning and becoming easterly winds 10 to 15 knots. Out over south central Alaska on Wednesday, up in the northern portions of the Gulf, south to west winds 20 to 25 knots, becoming northwest as we get closer towards the Kenai Peninsula and Barren Islands area, 30 to 40 knots, strongest by the Barren Islands, west 45 knots on the west side of the islands. In Cook Inlet area, southern locations, northwest winds 25 knots, becoming southwest 10 knots farther to the north. Prince William Sound, northwest winds 25 knots. For Thursday in Prince William Sound, northwest winds 25 knots. Out over the northern portions of the Gulf, east to northeast winds 10 to 15 knots. South of Seward, 25 knots out of the north. And then by the Barren Islands area, west to northwest winds 45 knots expected. In Cook Inlet area, north to northwest winds 10 to 15 knots. As we look down to the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island areas, around Kodiak Island, west to northwest winds 35 to 40 knots are expected. On the Bering side, we do have west to northwest winds 30 to 35 knots, strongest in Bristol Bay. And then on the Pacific side, west to northwest winds 30 to 40 knots, strongest as we get closer towards Kodiak Island. On Thursday around Kodiak Island, northwest winds 35 to 40 knots. On the Pacific side of the peninsula, northwest winds 30 to 40 knots, again stronger as we get closer towards Kodiak Island. And in the Bering side, we do have north to northwest winds 20 knots expected. On Wednesday for the Aleutian Islands out by the eastern Aleutians, southwest winds 35 to 40 knots, westerly winds 35 to 40 knots for the western Aleutians, or for the central Aleutians rather, and then for the western Aleutian Islands, southwest winds 35 knots with seas up to as high as 14 feet. On Thursday, out by the western Aleutians, southwest winds 25 to 35 knots, picking up as we get closer towards the far western areas, especially as we get south and west of Attu Island. For the central Aleutians, west winds 20 to 25 knots, and then becoming more northwesterly as we get by the eastern Aleutians, 15 to 20 knots, with 25 south of Nikolsky. As we get along the west coast of the state, northwest winds are expected 25 knots in Norton Sound, 20 knots near St. Lawrence Island, 10 knots north of Nunavik Island, and 25 knots south of Nunavik Island. Switching up a little bit by St. Matthew Island, easterly winds expected at 25 knots, and then for the Pribilof Islands, northwesterly winds 20 knots are expected. As we move into Thursday, locations up to the north are going to stay out of the northwest, 15 knots in the Norton Sound area and 20 knots by St. Lawrence Island. Southeast winds at north of Nunavik Island at 20 knots, and then south of Nunavik Island, northerly winds 25 knots expected. Quite a bit different as we get further out into the Bering Sea. Southerly winds by St. Matthew Island 35 knots with seas up to as high as 10 feet, and then by the Pribilof Island, southerly winds 25 knots expected. Up along the Arctic coastline, easterly winds 30 to 35 knots, becoming northerly as we drop down the west coast of the state around 25 knots, and then northwesterly as we move through the Bering Strait. On Thursday, along the Arctic coastline, easterly winds 20 knots, once again becoming more northerly as we move down the west coast, 15 to 20 knots there, and then northwesterly by the Bering Strait area. For a recap of our weather for tonight, the main weather producer is going to be the low out over the Brooks Range area that is bringing a lot of snow to mainland Alaska. We have several winter storm warnings out throughout the interior, as well as some winter weather advisories. A lot of the more northern locations of the interior and southern Brooks Range are going to be lasting into this evening, some going into around midnight tonight. But as we get into the southeastern locations of the interior, the snow is going to start to pick up more overnight tonight and then stay continuously with heavy snow throughout Wednesday and lasting into early Thursday morning in some locations. We also have blizzard warnings along the Arctic coastline. They're going to last until around midnight tonight, and some other blowing snow conditions along the west coast of the state. We have snow extending down into southwest Alaska as well as south central and the Panhandle, and then a mix of rain and snow for much of the Aleutian Islands and Bering Sea. As we move into Wednesday, a little bit warmer air for the Aleutian Islands, going to start to see some rain there, but still a lot of snow throughout mainland Alaska, especially the central and eastern locations of the mainland and along the Arctic coastline, where we'll still see some blowing snow up along the Arctic coast as well as the west coast of the state, and snow down in the Panhandle.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.